Detectives in Togas. Chapter 21. Light. Tellus suddenly moved. The boys started back. The boys started back in fright. "He's alive," Flavius whispered. "The sword," Julius cried. Mucius stooped swiftly, picked up the sword that lay on the floor, and clasped it firmly in his right hand. With a groan, Tellus sat up and gazed blearily at the boys. His fat face was smeared with blood. The clay mask had splintered as he hit the floor, and the sharp pieces had cut him. "Where am I?" he mumbled, and spat out a pebble he had been holding in his mouth. He had used the pebble, the boys realized, to disguise his way of speaking. They stared fiercely at him. Tellus saw the sword in Mucius's hand and gave a weary gesture. "You don't have to be afraid. I won't touch you. I must have injured myself badly. Have mercy on me. Lean me against the wall." His head drooped, and he gasped for breath. Cassius and Antonius threw a questioning look at Mucius. Mucius nodded. "Go ahead. I'll keep an eye on him," he said, raising the sword. Cassius and Antonius lifted Tellus under the arms and dragged him back so that he had the wall for support. "Thank you," he murmured feebly. He gave them an imploring look. "Don't betray me. Have pity on me." "You had no pity for Rufus," Julius said. "We must tell the police." "You're good, sensible boys," Tellus pleaded. "I'll tell you everything, then you'll forgive me. Help me." "Help you?" Publius repeated sarcastically. "Why did you pretend to be a soothsayer?" Antonius asked eagerly. "Come closer," Tellus whispered, rolling his eyes. "I can't speak any louder. I think I am dying." The boys drew around him, but Mucius watched him closely. He felt uneasy about Tellus's mild tone. "My spendthrift life has ruined me," Tellus began, speaking so softly that the boys had to lean forward in order to understand him. But as he continued, his voice strengthened. "I had to borrow huge sums of money. My banker refused to lend me any money more. My creditors threatened to sell me as a slave unless I paid them. That was 2 years ago. I could not flee because they had me watched. I wanted to commit suicide, but suddenly I saw a way to obtain money again. Many years ago, on one of my campaigns in the Far East, I had taken prisoner a famous soothsayer named Lucos. He had made a fortune by his soothsaying, but he confessed to me that he was a swindler and could not really prophesy. He was an intimate of the king of Persia and acquainted with the king's secret plans. Consequently, he knew in advance about important political events and skillfully used this knowledge. His prophecies almost always proved true, and the greatest men in Persia paid him enormous sums for telling them what the future held. So I decided to play the soothsayer also. I was an intimate of the emperor, and what is the king of Persia compared to the emperor of Rome? If Lucas could do it, I could do it. I certainly could. So I established myself here as a soothsayer and was soon earning enough money to pay all my debts. When the emperor finds that out, it won't be funny," Publius remarked. Tellus nodded. "It was a dangerous business. For that reason, I took all possible precautions to guard my secret. Everything was going well until Rufus caught me." "Rufus!" the boys exclaimed. "Rufus knew you were Lucos?" Julius asked. "He discovered it by pure chance," Tellus sighed. "He came to see me night before last and told me about the writing tablet he had hung on the wall of the schoolroom and about his fight with Cassius." "Why?" the boys asked. "He wanted me to put a spell on his teacher," Tellus said. The boys were still more surprised. "What were you supposed to do?" I was to use magic to make his teacher forget to go to his mother the next day." "What a sly fox," Publius said. "But how did Rufus know you were Tellus?" Mucius asked. "It happened this way," Tellus continued. "I wasn't going to waste time on a boy, so I asked him for money. I took it for granted that he had none. That proved to be the case, and he went away very downcast. After he was gone, 2 other clients came to see me, but an hour later I started closing up. But I expected guests at my palace. I went into the next room, removed my wig and the makeup, and then returned to this room because I had forgotten my seal ring on the table. And then suddenly there was Rufus standing in front of me. I had forgotten to use the secret mechanism to close the front door after the last visitor. Rufus had a purse of money in one hand and a lantern in the other. "That was my lantern," Mucius said. "Then you are Lucos," Rufus exclaimed. He knew me because I often visited his father. I gripped his shoulder. "If you betray me, I will kill your father," I threatened. I knew that the boy worships his father. "You can't do that. My father is far away," he said. "Oh, yes, I can," I said. "Your father has just suffered a shameful defeat. If you don't swear to keep this to yourself, I'll see to it that the Senate recalls your father and has him executed. You know very well I have the power to do it. I only have to say a word to the emperor." I shook him roughly to intimidate him, and that must have frightened him too much, for he dropped the money, tore away from me, and ran away. As he ran, his cloak slipped off. I wanted to follow him, but because of the cauthorns on my feet, I couldn't run fast. "Why were you wearing the cauthorns?" Flavius asked. "As Lucos, I wanted to seem very tall," Tellus said. "It also made me look thinner, so that it would never occur to anybody I might be Tellus." "I suppose that's why you painted your face and wore the wig," Antonius said. Tellus nodded. "I wore the clay mask only when I had no time to paint my face," he said. "Did you find Rufus?" Mucius asked. "No," Tellus said. "The door must have been open still, and he escaped." "The door couldn't have been open," Mucius said. "Otherwise he would not have escaped to the roof." "To the roof?" Tellus asked in astonishment. "I also fled to the roof because I couldn't get out," Mucius said. "You?" Tellus asked. "But there's no way to get down from the roof." "Yes, there is," Mucius said. "We jumped across to the roof of the baths of Diana and into the swimming pool." Telos stared at them. After a pause, he asked cunningly, But why didn't you escape to the roof just now?" "We couldn't," Cassius grumbled. The ladder slid down and jammed." The others were furious with him. Cassius was so dumb. It would have been much better for Telos to believe that they had a way to get out. Telos, moreover, seemed to be relieved. He glanced toward the corridor, murmuring, "So you might have escaped that way." "But why did you write Cassius is a dumbbell on the temple wall?" Julius asked. Tellus wiped the blood from his face again. "I didn't think of anything of the sort at first," he said. "I felt fairly sure that Rufus would keep his mouth shut out of fear for his father. But almost as soon as he left, another visitor came. I quickly put on my wig and the clay mask and let him in. It was a well-known senator, one who is feared for his sharp tongue. He had delivered a number of angry speeches against Pretonius in the Senate and had demanded his punishment on account of the defeat. He was highly excited. An hour before, a friend who had just come from Gaul had visited him and told him that Pretonius had not been defeated, but had won a decisive victory. The official courier, bearing the news of the victory, had been held up en route, but would surely arrive at the emperor's palace by the next day. The emperor asked me to foretell whether he would fall into disgrace with the emperor, or whether he ought to take the precaution of going abroad. I told him it would be perfectly safe for him to stay. I knew that the emperor would not hold it amiss that the senator had desired the downfall of Pretonius, because he is also jealous of Pretonius. The senator gave me a sack of gold pieces and went away jubilant. But I was in despair. Pretonius's victory was a disaster for me. The news of the victory would certainly be published next day, and then Rufus would no longer have any reason to fear my threat and would come out with his story. I had to silence him before he found out about his father's victory. But how? I racked my brains, and finally I thought of what Rufus had told me about the writing tablet and his quarrel with Cassius. I saw that I would have to pin some crime on Rufus and get him arrested. Once the boy was in prison, he would no longer be able to talk, and I would arrange things so that he would receive no trial and was sent off promptly as a gallery slave. "Shame on you," Flavius cried indignantly. Tellus merely said, "If Rufus told my secret, I was done for. What would happen if the emperor should learn that I had abused his trust in me?" "He who does evil will reap evil," Julius said, remembering the maxims Xanthippus had taught him. "That's the truth," Tellus said, "but at the time I thought only of saving my own skin. I put on my old military cloak, which had been given to me as a present when I was serving in the Orient, and I hurried over to the school. I knew the writing tablet must be hanging on one of the walls in the classroom. I felt along the walls, but in my excitement had forgotten to take off my cawthorns. They clattered when I walked and awakened your teacher, who came in. I struggled with him, threw him to the ground, picked up a stool, and knocked him on the head. Then I tied and gagged him and locked him in the wardrobe. He would have suffocated if we had not found him, Mucius said reproachfully. I had to have him out of the way, Tellus said. I wasn't able to find the writing tablet right off. Finally, I found it in the closet, in the chest. But why did you take the books and pictures? Flavius inquired. That was to make it seem like an ordinary burglary, Tellus said. Oh, we noticed right away that something was fishy, Publius boasted. But why did you send the courier to the newspaper? Julius wanted to know. Because I was afraid my plan might not have worked out, Tellus said. The idea was to have Rufus arrested as soon as possible the next morning. Perhaps the writing on the temple wall would have tried to hush up the matter. Or else Vinicius might have tried to hush up the matter. 1,000 things might interfere with the speedy arrest. So I thought of the newspaper story as a way of exerting pressure upon Vinicius. I knew that Vinicius sends his copyist to the newspaper every morning. Therefore I pulled the hood low over my face, and before I went to the temple, I delivered the story at the censor's office. Had I waited until afterwards, the office would have been closed. That newspaper report was your big mistake, Mucius said. How so? Because we figured out that it must have been written before the writing on the temple, Mucius explained. That is how we first got on your trail. Otherwise, we would have never suspected you. Tellus looked crestfallen. Every criminal makes some mistake, Julius said. You're no exception. But I had no choice, Tellus murmured. As a matter of fact, even the newspaper notice would have not helped me if I hadn't denounced Rufus to the prefect myself. So that was your doing, boy, the boys cried. So that was your doing, too, the boys cried, outraged. Yes, Tellus admitted. Next morning I had myself taken to the forum in a litter and waited near the prison to see for myself whether Rufus would be brought in. But as the time passed and the sun rose higher and higher, I began to fear that something had interfered with the arrest. We did, Mucius said triumphantly. I grew more and more worried. Before long, I knew the news of the victory would be published. Finally, I could stand it no longer. I ordered my bearers to take me to the prefect and accuse Rufus of the crime of blasphemy. I asked the prefect to keep my name secret out of consideration for the feelings of my friend Praetonius. The boys were stunned by so much evil. You're a wicked man, Flavius said. What could I do? Tellus said, and started groaning again as if he were suffering terrible pain. Can't you understand what a frightful situation I was in? He let his voice fade away in a whisper. But the boys were unmoved. Why didn't you run away? Antonius said. I didn't want to give up my comfortable life, Tellus said. I would rather have killed myself. So you should have, Mucius said contemptuously. That's easy to say, Tellus said. Wait until you yourself are rich some day. When I am rich, I will do only good, Mucius said with conviction. I suppose that after Rufus was in prison, you thought you were safe, didn't you? Publius asked with a spiteful grin. Yes, Tellus said. You didn't reckon with us, Mucius said. No, not at first, Tellus admitted. But after you came here with the chain, I began to be suspicious. I was taken by surprise, for I did not know that I had dropped it. In my panic, I lost my temper and threw you out. You threw snakes at us, Flavius reminded him. They aren't poisonous, Tellus said. I only wanted to frighten you. Why do you keep the snakes? Julius asked. I want the people who come to me to fear me. Humph, we weren't scared, Antonius boasted. Why didn't you throw the chain away? Mucius asked. It was a good luck token I was given in the East, Tellus replied. But it didn't bring you any luck, Publius pointed out. I fastened it to my cloak again and took it back to my palace. It seemed out of the question that anyone would ever find it there. But I found it, Antonius said. But what did you think when I came to see you? I realized at once that the letter was only a pretext, Tellus said. I wanted to get you drunk so that you would talk. I wasn't a bit drunk Antonius said. I didn't even really feel sick. When I discovered that my cloak was missing, I knew that you were on my trail, Tellus said. I counted on your observing me come in here and laid my trap. I deliberately left the back door open to lure you in. You wanted to murder us, Antonius reproached him. No, not that, Tellus said. I first wanted to find out whether you knew that I was Lukos. When I saw you saw that you didn't know. I, as Lukos, took all the blame in order to clear Tellus. That is why I told you I was going back to my native land. I was going to lock you in here so that you would not be able to follow me and see where I was going. Lukos would have made his disappearance, and Tellus would have been safe. Very cunning, Julius said. But we would have gone to the prefect of the city and told him that Lukos is the criminal. We would have brought him out here and shown him the writing tablet and Xanthopus's books, and then Rufus would have been released, and he would say that you are Lukos. You would have been too late, Telos said with a strange gleam in his eye. Before coming here, I went to the prison and bribed a card to send Rufus to the galleys this very night. The ship is sailing early tomorrow morning and will be gone for at least a year. You will never see Rufus again. The boys paled. Rufus would not long survive the grueling life of a galley slave. Murderer, Mucius burst out. Tellus gave a hypocritical sigh. You should never have stuck your noses into my affairs, he said. But you can still save Rufus, he added with a cunning look. How? The boys cried. We'll make an agreement, Tellus said. Let's leave it at that. That Lukos is the criminal and Tellus is innocent. If you swear you will not betray me, I will swear to send a messenger tonight to the captain of the galley with an order to release Rufus. The messenger can reach Ostia before the ship sails, but you must hurry. I know how to open the door. Let me out unharmed. The boys hesitated. They did not trust Tellus. What do we do if you don't keep your word? Julius asked. Then you can go to the police and inform on me, Tellus pointed out. But you're in no condition to walk, Flavius said. How will you get home? Tellus considered for a moment, and then he said with a groan, I'll let you out. Run to my palace and tell my slaves to come with a litter for me. Tell them Lukos tried to kill me and has fled. The boys were in a quandary. If they went away, Tellus could destroy all the evidence of his double life as soothsayer and could later deny everything. But there was little time to lose. If they were to save Rufus, they would have to decide on something. Give us a statement of writing that you acted the soothsayer Lukos and that you desecrated the temple, Julius said, and then we'll let you go home. In writing? Why? Tellus asked suspiciously. In spite of his blood-stained face, they knew the veins on his forehead saw the veins on his forehead swelling. Because then, if you don't keep your word, we'll take the statement of the emperor to the emperor, Julius said coolly. Tellus considered. What will you do when Rufus is free? He asked. We'll give the statement back to you. We'll swear that we will not betray you. The others were proud of Julius. This was brilliant thinking on his part. Once they had the statement, Telos could not cheat them, but he would have to hurry, for the light of the lantern was growing steadily dimmer, and they were very much afraid it would be dark before they could leave. Unfortunately, Telos seemed unaware of the failing lantern. Give me pen, ink, and paper from my desk over there, he said. I'll write whatever you say. He leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed, as though he were totally done in and no longer had the strength to object. Publius and Antonius brought Tellus paper and a reed pen and ink. They knelt down at his side. Antonius handed him the paper and pencil, and Publius held the ink. Tellus wrote swiftly. Then he started to hand the statement to Antonius, but Julius called out, Press your seal underneath for signature, otherwise people might think it wasn't genuine. Obediently, Tellus pressed his seal ring into the papyrus. Satisfied, Julius took the statement and read it aloud to the others. I, Marius Claudius Tellus, ex-consul and victorious general, hereby confess that I pretended to be the soothsayer Lukos and wrote Cassius is a dumbbell on the wall of the temple of Minerva. Rufus Praetonius is innocent. Fine, Julius said. And now tell us quickly how to open the door. We'll run over to the palace and send your slaves here. He's hiding somewhere. Tellus eyed Mucius and said, First you must swear. We swear, Julia started to say. No, you must all lift your right hands, Tellus murmured feebly. His eyes were almost shut now. The boys raised their right hands. Mucius hesitated, watching Tellus narrowly, but the man was drooping against the wall as if he were at the end of his strength. There was nothing to fear from Tellus. Mucius shifted the sword to his left hand in order to raise his right hand, and at that moment Tellus sprang forward, snatching at the sword. Mucius leaped back in a flash and pressed the tip of the sword toward Tellus's chest, shouting, "One move and I'll run you through." Tellus froze where he was, on his knees, staring with hate-filled eyes at Mucius. Suddenly the light went out. In the darkness the boys stood, numbed with fright. They heard Tellus jump up and make off, his high wooden shoes clattering against the floor. Then there was a brief silence. It was broken by several thunderous blows against the rear door and a confusion of excited voices in the yard. "Help!" the boys shrieked. "Open the door!" someone outside commanded. "We can't!" the boys shouted. "We're locked in." 3 more powerful blows followed. The door splintered and cracked at the joints. In the opening appeared Praetorians holding a battering ram. Back of them stood others with torches and drawn swords, their chest armor glittering in the glow of the torches. The Praetorians finished smashing the door, and the soldiers stormed into the vaulted room. Close behind the soldiers appeared 2 officers with high-plumed helmets, and then Vinicius in flowing senatorial toga, a long sword in his hand. Finally, Xanthippus squeezed through the ruins of the door. He was dripping wet. Waving his stick wildly, he shouted, "Where are they?" "Here," the boys roared enthusiastically. "Hooray for Xanthippus!" "The gods be praised you're alive," Xanthippus said, overjoyed. "Of course we're alive," Antonius said. "What's going on here?" Vinicius asked, looking inquiringly at his son. "Nothing in particular," said Cassius with great calm. "Telos is Leucos," the others shouted. Julius handed the statement to Vinicius, who read it in amazement. "By Jupiter, that is almost unbelievable. Telos is Leucos?" Suddenly he seemed to realize the meaning of the words, and his eyes flashed fire. "Where is he, the criminal?" he cried. "He's hiding somewhere," the boy said. "Find him." Vinicius ordered the soldiers. The Praetorians separated. Some ran into the adjoining chamber. 2 descended into the cellar, and others disappeared down the long corridor. From there one called, "He's escaped to the roof." "Follow him," Vinicius shouted, and they all ran into the corridor. The ladder was standing upright. In his desperation, Telos had summoned up strength to free it. Some of the soldiers had already climbed to the roof and called down, "He has disappeared." "Then he's jumped into the baths of Diana," Mucius shouted. "Follow me." He raced back down to the corridor. "Take the battering ram with you," Vinicius called to the soldiers. They ran across the yard, through the bakery, down Broad Street, and into the side street to the front entrance of the baths of Diana. The soldiers broke in the door, and they all rushed inside. Tellus lay on the floor of the swimming pool. There was no longer any water. Vinicius descended to the steps to where he lay and bent over him, and then he straightened up. "He is dead." There was a moment's silence. Only the beat of the rain on the roof and the low crackling of the burning torches could be heard. The boy stared wide-eyed at Tellus in the empty pool. "He jumped too late," Mucius murmured.